What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick,
My name is Dave.
and this is the Deep Dive, and we are starting a new series, or Dave, you just started a new series called Retold, and we're going to talk today a little bit about the old classic story, David and Goliath. Is that right?
That's right. It's the month of June. We're kind of in the summer now.
That we are
Not
fully
officially summer, but it felt like the first Sunday of the summer yesterday. A great day in worship. Had a lot of stuff going on.
It was a busy between the baptism and communion. And it was
Great skit yesterday. So, we'll talk about all that.
That's right. Well, let's get into it, shall we? Well, Dave, you had a very eventful weekend, being at conference and stuff like that. I was wondering, is there anything you'd like to tell the people, kind of any reports back from the conference that...
Well, it actually went over last Wednesday, so it was a real long weekend.
Yeah.
On Wednesday through Sunday was pretty active for me. It was really a good conference, and I came away there feeling very positive. We, as I think most people know, have a new bishop, and I love her. She's just a very calming, very spiritual person. There was at the ordination service, I had several friends actually who were commissioned, including my former associate pastor, who I'm still very close to, and so that was very moving for me. And so it was I'm tired, but it's a good kind of tired. And then Saturday I left conference and went to, my brother's an artist, and went to an art show that he was having in Swanee, Georgia. And then we had my sister, who lives in Florida, was up for the weekend, and because it's her birthday, and we had this big birthday party at this restaurant on Saturday night. And then yesterday after church, I went down to Inman Park for another dear friend of mine's birthday, and then I went out to eat with some friends last night. So it was a long weekend, but I'm feeling pretty good. And worship was great yesterday. It was a good Sunday.
It was a good Sunday.
Yeah.
And I bet you were talking about the commissioning service. I bet there's probably not many greater joys as a pastor than to see some people you got to work with, or people that you had a chance to mentor or go across a way.
Yeah,
cross that line.
And knowing about his story, and just how he went to seminary. A lot of it was during COVID. He had a struggle. It was a huge major decision for him to go to seminary and pursue being a United Methodist. He was coming from another denomination where he was ordained, and he had to surrender his credentials in that denomination to begin the process in ours. And so it was a real moment of joy for me. And I love him and his family, and it's great seeing them. So how about you? How was your weekend?
Had a good weekend. It was actually a pretty quiet weekend. We only had one kid for most of it, but on Sunday, for Saturday, I don't count it. We had two kids for like 10 minutes, but on Sunday we kind of had a full house again, so that was nice to kind of just see everybody. Our summer's going to be buck wild. We're going to be parents of one for most of it feels like, but it'll be a different one each time. But it'll be a good summer. We're excited, and but as for the weekend, it was just kind of pretty chill, actually. So
and here in the week we're in now, it kind of feels like the calm before the storm.
Yeah,
because starting next week we got VBS and then Grow Day Camp and a bunch of other stuff.
Are you excited about VBS?
I am.
We are in the same group, so I feel sorry for whatever kids get us, but
it's going to be wild.
Yeah.
Nick and I are teaching 4th and 5th graders, and along with a couple of other people, Jenny Jolly, and it's going to be wild. We're going to have a blast. It's going to be fun.
It's going to be fun. So next week on the podcast, if you see us and we're like, it's probably because we had a crazy day, but it'll be a fun day.
Yeah.
Always good times during VBS, so we're excited for that. But without further ado, Dave, why don't we get into the sermon that you kind of preached talking about David and Goliath?
Okay, so the idea behind this message series, first of all, it's summertime, and we want to do something a little bit different. I don't want to say lighter, because some of these sermon topics can have heavy stuff in it, but something I think that would be kind of fun and approachable for people. And so kind of toyed around with several ideas and landed on this Retold series, where we're looking at stories that honestly, you learn maybe in Vacation Bible School or Sunday school, and stories that are so classic that they're kind of told outside the church, and people may know of them and kind of know the basic story, but maybe not. Maybe they've remembered it different, or it's been told and it's gone so far from what's actually in the scripture that maybe it's time to go back and read it and take a look at what it is. And we started yesterday with, I think, one that just about everybody knows. It's a phrase we use whether you're in the church or not. People know about David Goliath and David and Goliath type stories. And so I thought that was a great place to begin.
Yeah, David and Goliath is a very classic story, and I mean, you talked about it a little bit in your sermon, but I mean, you hear about the analogy in sporting events all the time.
Lots of times in sports,
you know, even if it's like you're with your kids and you're going to a sport, you know, sometimes you'll find those teams that are like seem like they're 6 inches taller than everybody, and you're like, well, geez, we got a team of Goliath. So you know,
UGA's become a Goliath. But I remember lots of times. I remember Texas A&M beating Alabama. It was all they talked about was a David and Goliath. And actually, you remember the sports movie Hoosiers?
Yeah.
That was the big David and Goliath scene there, and like the chaplain from the team during talks about David and Goliath in that movie, and so it was a lot of illustrations I got pulled in, but we didn't have time on Sunday. But yeah, that's a good one. But anyway, I think to really get into the story, you need to understand the setting for it. Of course, it's in Israel, and it involves an encroaching army of the Philistines. And the Philistines originally were from Crete, but they had settled into kind of what in present-day Israel is kind of the coastal plain that's right down next to the Mediterranean. It's where Tel Aviv is now. That's where they were living. They were always going to war with the Israelites. This is not a one-time case.
Right.
You hear about the Philistines several times.
They're beefing,
They're always fighting. But their path up there, so from the coastal plain down next to the beach, which is, like Florida and kind of like, typical beach stuff, they had to get up to where Israel was, where the big cities, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, those cities were. And so to go there, they had to go through this kind of connecting area, which we call the Shephelah. But it's an area, and in the biblical terms, if you read through there in First Samuel 17, you'll see a lot of kind of unpronounceable biblical names there. But that's the region. That's where they are. And so it's sort of the rolling hills getting into the mountains part. And so they're going to come up through there. And the idea, I think, is they're going to try to attack around Bethlehem. Because then that'll cut that day Israel into two, and then they can divide and conquer there. So they're headed up that way. King Saul, who is the king at the time, finds out about it, and he gets his armies together and all his men, and he heads down towards there. And they get to this place where they're up on one ridge, and the Philistines are on this other ridge, and they're at a stalemate. They're just kind of sitting there looking at each other for weeks, because if you go down the hill, you make yourself very vulnerable, and it's going to be a huge bloody battle. And so they kind of...
It's classic. You don't want to give the other team the high ground.
That's right. It's just, exactly. Well, that'd be the low ground in that case. But
what I'm saying is you don't want to go down into the low ground, give the other person the high ground.
There you go. I never really understood that saying until now. Yeah, that makes total sense. So that's where they are, and they're having this stalemate. And so what they do, the Philistines do, is they send out this guy, Goliath. And so everyone's heard the name David and Goliath.
Sure.
And so Goliath is a giant. In biblical terms, if you do the math using what we know about where it was something in cubits or whatever, and he is 9 feet 6 inches tall. And so...
It's a big dude.
He's a big dude. And, there's some people that will look at that and say that is hyperbole, that is exaggeration, that, because the average person that, I don't know what the average height is now, 5'10", 5'11".
Something like that.
Yeah, they were like 5'3", 5'4" back in that day. The Israelites were, And so, they were saying, well, maybe he was 7 feet tall or 6 feet. But, I don't think it has to be that way. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I'm not a Bible literalist in that way. I mean, the Bible does use hyperbole and exaggeration, and they're biblical numbers as well. When they say 40 days, that's like we say in a month of Sundays. And so you see those terms. But in this case, maybe he was that tall. because there is this condition or called giantism, which we've heard acromegaly is actually the medical term for it. And it is a condition that people get where they just keep growing and growing and growing. They get a kind of tumor on their pituitary gland, which is the base of the skull. And so they keep growing and growing and growing. And there are some famous cases of it. The tallest person in recorded history that we know was a guy who died back in the 1940s named Robert Wadlow. And he, at the time of his death, was 8'11" tall. He died young, 22 years of age, but he was still growing at 8'11" and still growing. There's the tallest guy that's living today, and I actually wrote his name. I couldn't remember it yesterday, but it's Sultan Kozan. He is a Turkish farmer.
Okay.
And he is 8'2", but he had a surgery to have that removed, or he would have kept on growing. And they're famous people that we've heard of. Probably most famously would be Andre the Giant.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how tall he was, maybe 7 feet, 6'10", something like that. Of course, he died young because it's a medical condition, that they have. And also, I think you're too young to remember these people, but I was looking up who had this giantism. Herman Munster, the guy who played Herman Munster, that actor, and then also Lurch from the Addams Family. They both had this disease. And so there are people that have it. And so when you see someone that is such an anomaly for that time, you have to ask your reason why. And it could have been that he had this. And so, he comes down, this giant of a guy, and he is all decked out with all of this armor that as you add up that weight with biblical numbers, it's like 100 pounds of stuff that he has on him. And he makes this challenge to the Israelites, come out and fight me. And, one person to one person. And this was done. Back in that day is like, rather than having like huge cost of human life with everyone fighting, and there would be this bloody battle, then you send out your best warrior and we'll send out our best warrior, and whoever wins that wins. Right. And everybody else goes home. Right. So he's coming down there, and I guess he's doing it every day and saying some really derogatory stuff about the Israelites.
Not talking trash.
Yeah. Talking trash. Definitely. Yeah. He would make Draymond look like a Sunday school person to the Israelites about, come on down, cowards, and fight me, down here. And so the Israelites are terrified. They're 5'4", and this guy's a giant. He's a warrior. And so, so this is the place where our hero enters the story, David.
Good old David.
And David's just a little kid then, maybe a young teenager. I'm not sure what time people got into military service. They would have to be bar mitzvahed at 13. So, he might have been like 12, 13, 14 years old, but just a young kid who had been a shepherd, one of the youngest of his father's many sons. And so his father back in Bethlehem sends him to go down to the front line and check on the other sons and make some delivery of some provisions, some loaves of bread and stuff that he had. And 10 cheeses, which I find fascinating that's mentioned. He brings down these 10 cheeses. And so, he's been a shepherd. Now he's a cheese courier.
Sure.
And it takes it down.
Cheddar, you want Wisconsin, what you want.
I love cheese. And so just the fact that these 10 cheeses and to take them to their leader. And so that's interesting because the way I read it, they're grouped in thousands. So his troop would have been 1,000 people. So we're talking of many thousands of people that are at this stalemate, staring at each other for weeks, with this bully, this big giant Goliath coming out and talking trash every day. And so David gets there, makes the deliveries, and Goliath comes out and he hears him, and he's highly offended about it. He's mad. And he says, why isn't anybody taking this guy on? Why isn't anybody fighting him? And his brothers are going, are you kidding me? Have you seen the guy?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
you'd be an idiot.
Yeah. We don't have a death wish. And David says, well, I'll fight him. And then this part I didn't read yesterday, but there's a little interaction. You can imagine your little brother coming in, all headstrong and what you might say to him. But anyway, he ends up talking to Saul, who's the king, and saying, hey, your worries are over. I'm here.
Don't you worry, everybody. I'll handle this.
Yeah, I am here. Your servant is here. And Saul, of course, says, you're a child.
Yeah.
You can't do this. And he says, listen, I was a shepherd, and as I defended or took care of my father's sheep, sometimes bears and lions would come along, and God, was with me, and I was able to slay those bears and their lions and keep the sheep safe. I will take on Goliath. And so sometimes you have to question his leadership, because he says,
all right.
why not?
Ain't nobody else going to do it.
That's right. He's kind of out of options.
Yeah.
So he says, okay, do it. And so let me stop right there and say, this whole David and Goliath thing, as we said, it is become just almost a cliche to use that in terms. But there is this book that I've read by Malcolm Gladwell called David and Goliath. And it's where a lot of my sermon stuff came from. But he also has other David and Goliath stories. And one of the points the book made, and I want to I made the sermon yesterday, but I think one of the thrust of what this message would be is that giants aren't always as powerful as they seem. Sometimes we get things built up in our head and they just look so foreboding. And what seems to be advantages aren't always advantages, and disadvantages, or what we perceive to be disadvantages, really become our advantages, maybe the most important advantages we have. And so, in the book, he talks about, he has a number of stories, including David and Goliath, that's the key one, but many, many other examples of these sort of David and Goliath stories where people have, like with the rules of engagement, they have kind of not exactly bent the rules, but they've kind of looked at them with different eyes.
For him.
And so one of my favorite ones has to do with this basketball team out from Redwood, California. And, we have travel baseball and travel soccer, at least around here, maybe other travel swimming.
Yeah, we got to travel everything.
We got to travel everything.
Sure.
But there's travel basketball too, apparently.
So this would be the equivalent of like AAU basketball, if that.
Right. And so there was this one team out there, and a father who had never coached before, but he was really good in soccer, agrees to coach this team. And there was no aspirations this team's going to go anywhere.
Sure.
His daughter's on it, but other than that, there's only like 2 or 3 girls that actually even have played in a league of basketball before. And so they're terrible shooters.
Right.
And so he looks at the rules. And first of all, he looks at using his sort of soccer perspective. And it's like, why are you guys only playing like on half the court? You got the entire field, right? Because if you think about basketball, people dribble up and the action starts really at half court. So you got the whole court. He also discovered the rules, which I guess still are, that you only have 5 seconds to inbound the ball.
Right.
And that you only have 10 seconds to get it across half court. And so what they keyed in on was defense and full court press, and also being very good at defending when people are throwing the ball in. And so his team, like, they were very, very low scores, but like they would intercept because they were just frenetic. And if you want to research this, go on YouTube. There's a very cool video about it. But they would get up like 10-0 because they were still in the ball, and like you're usually under the basket. And,
you're close.
You're close. And so they were up 8 or 10 or 12, and lo and behold, they kept winning and kept winning. And people, the other teams started getting mad because of the way that they were playing. They're using
not against the rules.
They are finding some advantages. They could not possibly shoot with the other team. They didn't have those skills, but what skills that they could develop, they developed incredibly well. And there's stories about fathers confronting him in the parking lot and trying to fight this coach because you're breaking the rules. No, I'm not breaking the rules. Just using that. And so they went all the way to the national championship game. They unfortunately lost, but that is a David and Goliath story, and it was really they took their what could be considered a disadvantage and they turned it into advantage.
Yeah.
There's this other guy, and I got 3 or 4 stories written down here. I won't spend all the podcast talking about him, but there's another story of this guy who was a podcaster, and he decided to get into kickboxing. Well, he couldn't do all those other martial arts kind of skills but what he did, he was a great high school wrestler. And so he found out that if you get pushed off the area that they have in that, and if you step out of bounds 5 times, then you're disqualified. And so he turned it into a wrestling match kind of thing, wrestling the other people to get them to step out of bounds 5 times, they're out. And so he ended up winning the gold medal. And there's some other stories in there. I'd really commend this book to you of other things.
Make sure you show so people will see it and look at it.
David and Goliath, Malcolm Gladwell, he wrote Tipping Point and Blink and a number of others, but it's a great book. And yeah. And YouTube that story of that team from Redwood, California, because it's cool too. And so to getting back to the story, now we're about ready to have a confrontation. And you also need to know that back in that day, the way that wars were fought, there was really kind of three things they did in the ancient world. The one was they had the cavalry, and that was men on horseback with chariots.
Right.
And the Philistines, actually, that was what they were really good at, with the chariot stuff and everything. But they're now in the mountains, and so they can't use their chariots.
Right.
And so then you have the heavy infantry or the foot soldiers, and they're usually armed with swords and stuff like that. And that's what they were there doing, and what Goliath was doing.
Right.
But the other thing they had was, people using like archery and slings. They call them slingers. And so when we sometimes have pictures or think about David and Goliath, we think about this little kid with a little slingshot,
Yeah.
That's the way I kind of heard it as a kid.
Yeah, you think of like Dennis the Menace or something like that.
Right. Yeah, it was not like that at all. A sling was a deadly weapon at that time.
Yeah.
And what it was kind of this long thing with two long, it was a kind of a pouch with two long strings or cords attached to it. And they would get it, they put a rock in there or maybe a lead ball, and they would swing it around like this and get it going really fast. Then they would let go of one of the slings, and then they would fire out. And people got very accurate with it.
Yeah.
They could, kill birds and, apparently wolves and lions, but also people. It was used in warfare. I mean, it's in the Bible. It was used in warfare. And so they're all thinking about like hand-to-hand combat. That's what everybody, and David is thinking outside the box. He says, I can take on this guy. I'm an excellent slinger.
Yeah.
Everybody else is thinking he's going to be like using hand-to-hand combat.
You're not going to go grapple him.
Right. And so, I mean, one of the questions I have was really, David really, was he at a disadvantage?
Yeah.
If they're doing hand-to-hand combat, absolutely was. If that basketball team is just, shooting, they're at a disadvantage. But he is using, what his disadvantages are what he had, the tools that he had to his advantage. And so even Saul thinks he's talking about infantry kind of stuff. And so he puts his suit of armor on David. Of course, he's a little kid and he can't walk around with it. He says, I don't need this stuff. Let me get rid of that. And he picks up his sling and he gets 5 smooth stones. You also should know that the stones in that area, they're made out of the rocks that are in the area are like twice as dense as regular rocks. Barium sulfate is the kind of stones that are in that area. And so the people who like to do math and the calculations around that say that like when you are doing that and release it, the speed of that thing is faster than like who throws the fastest fastball now in the Major League?
Probably like Aroldis Chapman or something like that. Throws like 102, 104.
102. Faster than that.
That's insane.
It's insane that they're throwing it. And so with the ballistics in the short range, it would be the equivalent of shooting somebody with a gun.
Wow.
And so David, and then also we're going to talk a little bit about the disadvantages that Goliath had, having this condition. And one of the things, if you kind of look carefully in the scripture, you see a couple of ideas that maybe Goliath wasn't as foreboding as he appeared.
Right.
First of all, why is he led onto the battlefield? And turns out that that part of the side effects of this condition of giantism is that you have really poor eyesight, often double vision, because just the way it pushes on the brain and nervous system. And so he says in the scripture, why have you come at me with sticks? Well, he didn't have sticks. He had a sling, pouch with the 5 stones. Possibly had his shepherd's staff, but he's double vision, so he sees sticks, and he's slow, and and so he sees David, and he says to him a couple of times, "Come to me, I'll fight you." Of course, there's no way he could possibly win that battle.
Yeah.
But David's very, very good with that sling, and so vulnerable part around the where the the armor helmet doesn't come down, and he swings and hits him right between the eyes, and either this scripture is not clear on this. Either knocks him out or kills him.
Right.
If he wasn't killed by being hit by that stone, when David gets there, he takes his Goliath's sword and cuts off Goliath's head.
So he's dead there. Yeah.
That would have killed him.
At some point, he died.
Yeah.
we'll just leave it at that.
That would have killed him. And that cutting off the head, we don't usually get to that part with our Sunday school lessons.
At least not in the children's version.
Not in the children's version. And so he wins. They win the battle of that. And so the idea, go back to the thing is that giants aren't always as powerful as they seem. They've all got weaknesses and vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And sometimes what we think of as a disadvantage actually ends up being our advantage. Not having that armor around to do that sling is actually an advantage. Looking at it, maybe not being a trained infantryman like David's brother would have been, allowed David to think out of the box and use the gifts that he did have. But there's some people said that David kind of cheated in that battle. Well, no, I don't think so. I think that is maybe at least bending the rules or looking at the rules that are there. The objective was to slay Goliath, and he used what he had.
I'm not sure rules apply too much
to
war.
Yeah, they don't. But no one's thinking like there's other ways to get rid of this giant than just fighting him.
This is an MMA battle. They weren't introduced by Michael Buffer. This is.
And so that's the story. Of course, then David becomes a national hero, and he comes back in. That really set up the acrimony that he and Saul had, because they made up this song. They were saying, Saul slayed his thousands, but David has slain 10,000s. We actually just slayed one, but there could have been 10,000 men to get rid of. So that really kind of set up the situation with Saul and David, but that's another sermon for another time.
Different time.
But what I'd like for us to maybe kind of focus on is that as Christians, I mean, David gives all the glory to God.
Yeah.
But I guess my point would be like, this wasn't exactly like a miracle kind of thing. I mean, David was using what he had.
Yeah.
He was using the gifts that he had in the name of God and
Sure.
the confidence in the gifts that he had. And so as Christians, are there gifts that God has given us that may seem like disadvantages, as we we may seem vulnerable as we're looking at challenges that we might have, but actually, if we think about it in a different way and allow God to kind of guide us, they actually might end up being our advantages.
Do you have an example of one that's kind of hitting you off the top of the head, or?
I think our message of love in a divided world.
Yeah.
I think the way that people feel like they have to win, so to speak, is by destroying their opponents.
Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln said the best way to get rid of your opponents is to make them into friends. And I think sometimes we're trying to argue people into the kingdom of God, or belittle people in the kingdom, or whatever, or see this whole confrontation with the outside world.
Yeah.
And our message of love and grace and hope is powerful and needed in the world today.
Well, I do know, I don't really necessarily have a specific answer, but another way to look at this even is Goliath kind of being what we might say are like some of the giants in our world.
Right.
Some of the things that you would argue that might just feel like they're too opposing, like they're too big for us to take on ourselves.
Right.
But the faith of David, but also him using what he had, using the tools, using the skills, using the stuff that he's already been using his whole life, to conquer these things. And it was like, I wonder if God, how often has God already prepared us for the big trials that we come up against, but we don't know it yet because we don't know what it takes. Or
one thing that was clear to me as I reread it, and it's just one chapter. Sure. I invite everybody to read this first chapter 17. Is David's confidence, and that confidence came from God. You can tell, but David's confidence throughout the story. David didn't say, "Well, maybe this will work." I mean, David knew. I mean, David's like, "There's a problem. Why isn't somebody getting rid of him?
Yeah,
just go down there and take your sling and kill that, sucker,
big guy."
Yeah. But they were always like, "Oh no, we can't find him." David said, "That doesn't look like that'd be hard to do."
Yeah.
It's kind of like Luke Skywalker, when they were having to shoot inside that thing, and he says, "Oh man, I shoot wharf rats." They're smaller than that.
Yeah.
And so David said, look, that guy's pretty vulnerable. He doesn't look like he's very fast. I think I can take him.
Yeah.
So, I think we need to look at what we have and have the confidence that I think it comes from God to take on some of these things. And
For sure.
But yeah, it's a great story.
It is a good story, and you're right. Like I feel like there's a lot of these stories. There's times when we're younger, or Sunday school, or like a vacation Bible school, where we might touch on these stories, but we kind of keep them at a kind of a surface level understanding of it, as opposed to saying like, well, why is this story in the Bible?
Yeah.
What is its purpose there to try to talk to or teach us about
what
God?
can we really learn from it? What when we read it and maybe read it with some new eyes in a way was going like, because I think that like in the David and Goliath things was like, it would take a miracle to do this. And, and that's not to say that miracles don't happen and
Right.
God doesn't cause them in different ways. And sometimes when there doesn't seem to be a way, God makes a way. But I think sometimes just by our own limited vision, we don't see what we already have
Yeah.
that could be really effective. And so sometimes we see, that is like what David did the impossible. But I think David from the very beginning saw it as possible,
Right.
and
Just need the right tools,
and
right?
we kind of shut ourselves down from even trying
Yeah.
because we don't realize the resources that God's already given us and the skills that God's already given us. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I for one am excited to kind of continue this series.
Yeah.
I think it'll be fun to kind of relook at some of these classic stories and just kind of figure out what's God teaching us from this along
Sure.
the way. But as we wrap up David and Goliath, what's the next story we're talking about?
Well, I don't know if I should totally give it away, but I should. I mean, because I think if people come and want to read it before and get prepared.
Yeah.
But it's Jonah. It's a
Okay.
big fish story. And that's the title of the book in the Old Testament is Jonah. And it's just 4 little chapters.
Yep.
And so there's some new things to learn there too. I'm excited. I was really excited to preach this sermon when I got up on Sunday, because I knew, I said, man, there's some things that'll preach here. But I'll tell you, I started working today on Jonah, and I was going like, there's some stuff that's just as good
Oh yeah.
next week. So it's going to be fun.
It is.
Yeah.
It's gonna be fun, and I look forward to it. And I hope you guys do as well. But that will be the podcast. As always, any comments, you know where to drop them. We talk about it weekly. But if you have any giants in your world that you need somebody to kind of walk with you or pray for you or help you kind of understand the tools that maybe you do have at your disposal, come talk to us. Seek out people. We have people in our church, again, the Stephen ministers who are trained to help be in some of those spaces. We're happy to help you through some of those spaces. Just that's where we can be in community and help each other out. So that's what we're looking to do. But Dave, we're going to wrap this up. Is there anything you'd like to add here at the end?
I'm good.
All
good
right.
today. Y'all have a great week, and God bless everybody, and hope to see you back next Sunday.
We'll catch you next time.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take care.